All right. Good evening, church. Hope you're doing well tonight and I'm able to find some time to tune in on Facebook Live for a few minutes with us for the sermon recap. We'll give a few minutes here for folks to join in, and as a few get on here, then we will dive into what we're going to look at tonight. All right, we got somebody on there. As people get on here, just a reminder, as you join in with us, be sure to let me know in the comments that you're here. All right, Cleve's here. Cleve, we'll give a few folks a few more minutes and we'll dive into this. I don't want to take too much time tonight. I got to get over to the church this evening, and we've got some prep work to do for our work day. So I got some stuff I got to take care of tonight to get over there and get ready. And so I want to make sure I get out of here by within the next half hour for sure. So that's good news for everybody that joins in. All right, just Cleve right now. You're the Lone Ranger, buddy. Thanks for being here. I'm going to type in the comments what we're going to talk about, and we'll see if anybody else hops on here. Primary takeaways from our first sermon series. We are set. All right, so we got a few people on here now, so let's dive into this. What we're looking at tonight is really a recap of the first sermon series. So, really enjoyed walking through the first 7 chapters of Acts with together, and I feel like I was edified by this. Certainly, it shaped my understanding of what we're looking to do as a church, as a pastor, and how I'm leading, and making sure I keep some primary things in mind, and hopefully you as well. As you walk through this with us, that you are also encouraged by this. And again, just looking at some primary takeaways tonight, some things that we need to bear in mind as we move forward as a church. I'll say this at the outset, it was very intentional that we chose this series in Acts as the first sermon series for us to walk through together because I feel like it's foundational to the church's ministry. It was a good way for me to personally frame what we're aiming to do as a church and who we are as a church and what our mission is as a church. And then also, I hope that it gave you a good understanding as well of where the church has been and where the church is headed. And I feel like this really sets us in a position to really chart the territory going forward of what we're aiming to do. And so, again, this series took us through the first 7 chapters of Acts. We are stopping intentionally after Acts chapter 7. And I'll explain a little more the significance of why that's the break we chose, and then explore really, where we're going forward in the next series as well. All right. So, just kind of to frame this around a couple of questions, what we learned primarily from Acts chapters 1 through 7 is the answer to these 2 questions. Number 1, what is a church? Right. So we kind of answered that question really in the first week I was with you all. Preaching in view of a cause. We looked at the end of Acts chapter 2 at the church's central activity. But then we answered even further than that, what are the fundamental purposes of a church? So not just what is a church, but what is a church supposed to be doing? And I said this often throughout the series that, every church is going to do this a little bit differently. That's okay. It doesn't mean that every church has to do it exactly like the first church did here in Acts. However, the first church does give us a little bit of a blueprint, so to speak, a framework to work around as we seek to reach others with the gospel. And so the answer to those 2 questions were really pivotal in kind of shaping what we were talking about. The title of the series, We Are Sent, we learned is basically that we are supposed to be a sent people, right? We are commissioned by God in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8 to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so we are a sent people. And as such, we are also a sending people, which means that we will also be sending people out of our church to make disciples as well, whether that's in our community, in communities around us, or hopefully one day in the future to the ends of the earth. And so this will be a driving, this will be a driving force behind everything that we do as a church. Okay, so that's why it was important again to start here. So what I want to do tonight is just go through 7 major takeaways from the sermon series. I'm not going to, hit everything that we talked about in the series, but really these big things that I want you to hold on to, and they'll come up quite often as we continue to work through what the vision of our church is and how we're going to go about accomplishing that vision in our community and beyond. Okay, so 7 big takeaways. Number 1, we're given the blueprint for ministry in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. If you got a Bible with you, I encourage you to open there or at least jot this down. Acts chapter 1 and verse 8 kind of gives us the framework and the way that the ministry of the church was going to go forward. And Luke writes here, he says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you will be my witnesses in," here's the blueprint, "in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." So I told you I would kind of help you understand why we are stopping after chapter 7. It's really because the way the book of Acts is organized is there's this activity that's focused around these 4 different areas. So at the end of chapter 7, we get kind of the culmination of the ministry activity in Jerusalem. And after the stoning of Stephen, what we see is the church began to move out and move forward with the gospel. And so this blueprint of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth provides kind of an outline for the book of Acts. So when we come back to the book of Acts, we won't be talking so much anymore about ministry activity in Jerusalem, but really we'll be talking about ministry activity in Judea and Samaria. And so that's why we're finishing again after chapter 7. But Luke begins here with this commission, right? In verse 8, that there's this ministry activity in Jerusalem. And we talked about what that meant for us as a church to love our Jerusalem well, which would be the city and the town of Cave Spring, which is a great place to start. All right? So, Acts chapter 1, verse 8, the blueprint. The second big takeaway is this: the Holy Spirit should drive our ministry activity. The Holy Spirit should drive our ministry activity. We see this begin in Acts chapter 2 at Pentecost, right? Remember, that was the event where the church received the gift of the Holy Spirit. And we see in Acts chapter 2, verse 4, it says, "Then they were all filled with the Holy Spirit." So there's this initial activity by the Spirit in chapter 2. And so that became a launching point for the first church as the Holy Spirit, again, they were filled with the Spirit, and it drove the rest of their ministry activity. And you see this idea of being filled by the Spirit come up over and over again before Peter preaches. Often this happens before there's a healing event. This happens before any ministry activity really takes place. There's this kind of this looking back, if you will, to the filling of the Spirit. So for us today, we should be reminded that the Holy Spirit should also drive our ministry activity. The third takeaway is this: unity is critical to mission. Unity is critical to mission. So the idea of unity came up in really 2 different sermons. One of those was in Acts chapter 5, and the other one was in Acts chapter 6, just a couple of weeks ago. In Acts chapter 5, remember, that was the rather uncomfortable sermon looking at Ananias and Sapphira and how their lack of integrity almost compromised the unity of the church, and how God intervened, right? And that this lack of integrity did not interrupt the mission of God at all. And then in Acts chapter 6, we see unity compromised in a little bit different of a way. And in that place, we see that this infighting, this backbiting, this gossip was the way we termed it in the first 7 or 8 verses there in Acts chapter 6, almost compromised the unity of the church. And as a result, the apostles had to get together and make a decision on how to divide up the tasks, if you will, for the rest of the church. But nonetheless, unity is critical for our mission as well at First Baptist Cave Spring. As we move forward, as we reach more people, as we continue the mission of God in our community and beyond, our unity as a church is critical. And so that's mission critical, if you will. Fourthly tonight, the big takeaway: the resurrection is our message. The resurrection is our message. Peter begins right off the bat by talking about the centrality of the resurrection, that the resurrection had to be true in order for the church to go forward. In order for the church to even need to do ministry, the resurrection had to be true. In Acts chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, we read about what the onlookers thought about this ministry activity and this message of the church. Luke writes, he says, while they were speaking to the people, the priests, the captain of the temple police, and the Sadducees confronted them because they were annoyed that they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead. So again, they weren't annoyed. Remember we talked about this. They weren't annoyed by what they were doing, the healing events and those kind of things. Instead, they were annoyed by the message of the resurrection. And we talked about that in that particular sermon. But even today, the resurrection has to be our message. It has to be the focus of our ministry. We can do ministry different ways. We can have different strategies. However, the resurrection has to be central to everything that we're doing. Fifth, tonight, we see this. We see that ministry is an all-hands-on-deck activity. Ministry is an all-hands-on-deck activity. In Acts chapter 5 and verse 42, we looked at the end of that sermon, at the end of that chapter, how ministry was beginning to kind of take root in the lives of other people beyond the apostles. We read these words, every day in the temple and in various homes, they continued teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. Again, this activity was going on in various homes. That was important. That kind of gave us an understanding that it wasn't just the apostles doing the ministry anymore. The same way, for us as a church to go forward and be effective in ministry, it's not only my job, it's not just the deacon's job to do ministry in our community. This is an all-hands-on-deck kind of approach to ministry, and we see this in the first church, and it should be true today as well. Everyone plays a critical part in the mission of God through First Baptist Church of Cave Spring. Whatever we talked about, your giftedness and your talents and what you bring to the table, whatever that is, use that for the glory of God. The next thing that we see is that we need to be bold in our witness. We have to be bold in our witness. There will be times where there will be opposition to the activity that's going on through First Baptist Church of Cave Spring, and we have to press forward regardless of those who may speak against the message we are preaching. We see in Acts chapter 4 and verse 13 this boldness highlighted. Notice what Luke writes here about the ministry of Peter and John. He says, when they observed, meaning the scribes and the Pharisees, when they observed the boldness of Peter and John and realized that they were uneducated and untrained men, they were amazed and recognized that they had been with Jesus. And so again, their amazement came from a recognition that these men were bold in their witness, and it wasn't because there was anything special about them. They were uneducated and untrained men, and yet there was this understanding that they had been with Jesus. In the same way, for us at First Baptist Church of Cave Spring, as we move forward in ministry, we have to be bold in our witness, and that boldness will communicate clearly that we've been with Jesus. It doesn't mean we're arrogant or rude. Again, I talked to you a few sermons ago. It's okay for people to like us as Christians. In fact, that's probably a good thing. We want people to like us. Be nice to people. I gave you the illustration. When you go to the restaurant, make sure you tip well. Do those kind of things. Just practical ways of being nice to other people. We want people to like us, but at the same time, our message may not always be very appealing to others. And so it will require some boldness on our part. The last thing, and really I guess the culminating message of this entire series is this. When we do ministry this way, when we bear those 6 things in mind, and we continue to move forward as a church, again, all hands on deck. The Holy Spirit is behind everything that we do. We're following that blueprint for ministry like we see in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. We continue to be bold, and we hold fast to our unity as we continue forward. When we do all of this stuff together, the advance of the gospel cannot be stopped. Did you hear that? The advance of the gospel can't be stopped. The church can't be stopped. We will move forward. It's not about having the best strategies or programs, although those things are important. When we do these things, when we are sincere in following Jesus and living out our faith on a daily basis as witnesses in this community and beyond. The gospel will be proclaimed and lives will be changed. We know this when we look at Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, right? Remember, this is so cool. We ended the sermon this past week looking at this. Remember, Stephen had just been stoned. He had been killed, and the persecution of the church had kind of crescendoed at that moment. And it wasn't looking good for the first church. But in verse 1 of Acts chapter 8, it says, Saul agreed with putting him being Stephen, to death. On that day, a severe persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the land of Judea and Samaria. How cool is that? Remember in chapter 1 and verse 8, we're given that blueprint, right? To make disciples, to go minister in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And through this persecution, we see that the gospel witness goes out of Jerusalem and into Judea and Samaria. Talked the other week about how Satan had thrown everything that he could at the first church to disrupt the ministry activity. He had threatened their unity. He had their people in their church that lacked integrity to kind of undermine the witness of the gospel. He had their leaders imprisoned. Through other means, he had also had their leaders stoned. And now, Stephen had died as a result of the witness that he had, the bold witness he had for the gospel. And yet, through all of those things, as they were running for the hills, as they were running for their lives, the gospel went forth. So church, I want to encourage you as we move beyond this series and we continue to talk about our witness in Cave Spring and beyond. Understand that this is kind of our blueprint. This is the way we're going to approach ministry. These are the things we need to hold on to, and you'll hear me remind you often about these things as we move forward as a church. God is doing some great stuff through our church, things that you may not have gotten to see yet, but things that I'm privileged to see happen on a day-to-day basis. People are beginning to ask gospel-centered questions. They're beginning to talk to me about questions they have about faith, about salvation. Roots of an incredible movement of God are right here in Cave Spring, and I'm so excited about what's going to happen in the days, the weeks, the months, the years ahead. And I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to walk through these first 7 chapters with you. I'm privileged to be your pastor. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to shepherd you as a church, and I'm grateful for your partnership in ministry. I encourage you to keep praying for us as a church, keep praying for our unity, keep praying for those in our community during this, really difficult time in our world. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of unanswered questions, things that I don't have the answer to. Remember that God is in control and He is watching over our church as we move forward. And no matter what the circumstances are, even in the first church, in the face of incredible persecution, in that uncertain season, the gospel still went forward. So church, I want to encourage you. The gospel will still go forward, no matter how uncertain the times are. I love you, church. A couple of quick announcements as we wrap things up tonight. Remember that on Saturday we have our work day. It's going to be a big day for us as we clean some rooms out at the church that aren't really used anymore and have just been collecting stuff over the years. I encourage you to be there with us as we do that. It's not going to be real labor intensive, but the more people we have there, the quicker that will go. And there'll be some minor outdoor stuff that we're going to take care of. Also, remember that this is the last week, this coming Sunday is the last Sunday that we're collecting funds and the diaper drive for Haven Health. I encourage you to bring a financial contribution to that in a well-marked envelope. If you don't have an envelope, we have them at the church. I encourage you to put it in there so we know that it goes to them. Then also bring a pack of diapers, sizes 2, 4, 5, and 6, and there'll be a bin out in the lobby of the church that you can place those. Please keep inviting people to church. I know that many of you, as we're still in the middle of coronavirus, and it's becoming kind of the norm for us at this point. I encourage you, invite people to come with you to church. We want to meet them. We want them to get plugged in with us. And if not, be on Facebook Live on Sundays at 11, and we'll love to see you there as well. If you ever need me for anything, don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you Saturday. If not then, we'll see you Sunday.